So, Jaha, I heard recently that you were in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, looking at Flight 93. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I mean, I actually took a day trip yesterday, specifically for to visit the United Flight 93 Memorial.
And how does that come about? Do you just have a natural interest in plane crashes or in United? Is it something else?
Do I have a natural interest in plane crashes? Well, I will say, I have watched all episodes of Mayday Air Crash Investigation. So, but Flight 93, like, right, we always, talk about, I mean, we always talk about, the other 9/11 airliners, but, and for good reason too, because, their impact was much greater, but and also because Flight 93 crashed in quite literally the middle of
In a
nowhere.
field.
Yeah, middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. Um, but hey, I mean, I decided, hey, I'd never been, so I made the 11-hour round trip drive just yesterday. Have you been there before?
And I have not, and I'm curious what it's like. Is it like any normal memorial? Like, is it similar to the 9/11 memorial? I noticed that you had a pamphlet. Is it run by like the National Park Service?
Yeah, of course. I mean, everything's run by the National Park Service. But it's actually like really interesting. It's not, whereas the 9/11 memorials in like Manhattan, they're just, they're like only at the site, the towers themselves. The Flight 93 Memorial, they actually include a long alleyway of trees, which loop around to the crash site. And the crash site itself, they've actually placed to mark the exact location of impact. They've actually placed a sandstone boulder there. Um, so of course there are no plane parts left or anything, but that marks the
Hmm.
actual position. And there's also of course a wall of names of the heroic passengers who brought the plane down before it could cause more damage.
Yeah, and that flight was heading to the White House. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's really unsure because, fortunately, you know, fortunately, it wasn't make it it wasn't able to make it to Washington, so we won't know for sure. But they say, it was planned to either hit the White House or the Capitol building. Um, but yeah, I mean, if you're ever in, middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, it's definitely a place you should go. And even if you're not there, it's definitely a place which should be planned. A trip should be planned there, especially considering how little attention it gets, um, at least compared to the other events of 9/11.
Yeah, certainly. I would imagine it's far less visited. And actually, just I'm not all too familiar with the rural Pennsylvania. Is it closer to Pittsburgh or is it closer to Philadelphia? Is it closer to like Scranton area?
Oh, it's definitely in Western Pennsylvania. It's I actually went to Pittsburgh right after. It's about an hour and a half to the southeast of Pittsburgh. So it's actually if you are gonna be visiting from a major city, it's actually like it's near the midway point between Pittsburgh and Washington D.C. So which also gives you a pretty good image of there were only like 30 minutes left before the plane would have made impact. So you know, um, I guess you can also visit from D.C. is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and do you know by chance is it close to Connellsville? Because I know you can take the train from DC to Pittsburgh, and I wonder if it's close by to that.
Connellsville. I let me see. Where is it exactly? I'm looking at a map right now. Yeah, it is close in the sense that it is not empirically it is relatively close, but yeah, you still need to what is it? You need to drive like what half an hour to get there. Um, so I don't yeah no it's in Flight 93 is by it's in Somerset County, and Connellsville is closer to Pittsburgh. So maybe taking the train to Connellsville isn't the best game plan to visit the Flight 93 Memorial.
Yeah, it does look a lot more rural than I expected it to be.
Although I will say, speaking of trains, how was your big transit run in the Bay Area?
It was fun, and it was surprisingly it was very, I guess, life changing in a sense, because I hadn't been on
Wow.
Amtrak, on the any Amtrak California train in since I lived in San Diego, which was felt like a very long time to me. And I think it was really nice to be back on the Capitol Corridor, because I hadn't been on it in a really long time, and being used to some pretty clanky commuter trains for a while, I didn't actually realize that there were some really nice train sets out there. Because I realized pretty quickly that the Capitol Corridor offers a lot of legroom and relatively cheap snacks. It was like $2 for a bag of chips, and then the views were impressive, especially when you get closer to San Jose. You have nice views on the water, and I think that was the best part. Of course, I used many other modes as well.
Okay. Well, actually, well, I want to ask about the views, but first of all, I mean, it's interesting you described Amtrak as, you described it as life changing because, I mean, I think a lot of other people, a lot of other people who take Amtrak would agree that it is life changing, but I think for most of them, it is life changing in the other way, in the sense that that once they've taken Amtrak and they've experienced the billion-hour delays, or the right the arriving 20 hours late, people, it is life changing for them because they are now determined to never take Amtrak again. So I mean, I'm glad you had a positive experience, but what were the you said you had a view of the Bay Area. Were there any other, like, of these sort of more irregular views?
Well, in terms of views, I was surprised by the views of Niles Canyon. So I took the Ace train from San Jose to Pleasanton, and in between Fremont and Pleasanton, it goes through a canyon, which was surprisingly beautiful. And that day it was really hot. It was 106 degrees in Pleasanton, but that canyon somehow gets
116. Holy wow.
106. But
Oh.
that it was unfortunate, because that the weekend and Friday was one of, I think it was the hottest June day on record we've had. So we were in a heat wave, and it was nice to escape it on the train.
Oh, by the way, speaking of hot days, happy summer solstice. It is
Oh yeah, I
June.
forgot about that. Today's that means it's officially summer, doesn't it?
Is that what? Wait, what is it? Today's the longest day of the year, but summer has started. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I totally forgot about that. Yeah, that's interesting.
Happy solstice, man.
Yeah.
Wow. But yeah. Did you what about, for example, you also said the other, what was it? What's that one? What's that commuter train that you took? You took the Caltrain and then
The Ace,
the Ace. Yeah.
the Altamont.
How's that?
I was also very impressed by it, because it uses the bi-level cars, which are pretty. It's a good ride. It's pretty smooth, and like I said, the views coming out of San Jose along the water are pretty beautiful, and also the canyon views you get are nice as well. And I was also impressed to see the ridership levels, because prior to the pandemic, it was getting a lot of ridership, and they were using 7-car trains, and there was probably 30 people getting on at each station, which it appeared like a lot to me, which was nice to see with the pandemic.
Wow. Nice. So there were actually,
Oh,
like,
and
a lot of people on there.
yeah, and there were, and also to add, I was also very impressed by the new SC44 Charger engine, which I've rarely ever seen Ace use without an F40 PH to back it up. So my train had its own SC44 without any other engine, so that was cool to see as well.
Oh, the SC. Oh, okay. I mean, I've seen them on Amtrak, but Ace uses it too, huh?
Yeah, they just got them recently, and I think of all the SC44s in the country, I think Ace has one of the best liveries. So it's pretty cool.
Cool. Nice. Wow. But yeah, so I mean, certainly sounds like a fun trip. But I mean, there's no denying it, right? There has been big news in aviation lately, hasn't there?
Yeah, very big news.
Very big news. Are you do you remember Concorde?
Unfortunately, I was born after the last one flew. I was born in 2004. So I believe you'd be around, but I wouldn't be.
Yeah, I was born 9 months before the last Concorde flight, unfortunately. which means that if my parents had decided to fly from New York to London, or what was it, London to New York? Yeah, before October, like, when I was like 5 months old or something, I might have been able to say I've been on Concorde. But with the new news, we might be able to have the experience again, eh?
And we might, and I'm curious. So I think to the top of mind, Boom Supersonic will be supposedly starting service in 2029. Do you think you're going to be on the first flight, or do you think it's even going to happen in
The
2029?
first flight. I mean, I maybe if I invent, I don't know, some humongous thing and become a multi-billionaire, you know. But I mean, I guess they say it's going to be launched in 2029. I want to know what you think as well, but at least for me, I certainly, especially since, well, let me say this, right? They are making a lot of bold claims. It is not just the release date. It is, the capability. It is the cost. Everything, all the claims they're making are extremely bold. So
Yeah.
from that angle, and also because when I first saw the news, I was like, wow, I doubt immediately, right? Um, so I mean, I think it's definitely not gonna be. It's gonna be pushed back for sure, because if you think about it, there's only like 8 years to implement, like, what is it? All this massive like new technology. Um, so it's definitely gonna be pushed back. But what do you think? Like, for example, what were your initial reactions to the news?
Well, I think before I get into it, I do want to just mention it because I don't think we've said it yet that United has ordered 15 of these Boom planes, and as I think my initial reactions were more associated around United doing it, because frankly, I don't really trust United with a lot of their decision making, and I don't really believe that they're actually going to follow through. And a lot of times, they try to do something to appease customers, and it's really just like a greenwashing attempt. So I really doubt that United is going to be able to implement this successfully, and I imagine it's probably. I think Boom may have trouble later on because I haven't heard of them securing any other customers. So I think my initial reaction was just a bit of hatred towards United and really doubting why they would need to do this. But I think that can change over time, and I hope it does. But I certainly don't have very positive perceptions of United.
Yeah. So actually, let's
I
talk.
don't know. How about you?
Let's talk about this, because this is, it certainly is a valid point, right? Like, you know perhaps, it was perhaps inevitable, right, that Supersonic would maybe be back, because, come on, the future, right? um but why United is certainly a good point. And as you said, hatred for United is absolutely valid, because they, shall we say, have just the most spotless customer relations history ever, right?
Hmm.
But I think,
Totally.
I definitely agree with the point that this is definitely a PR stunt. At least maybe not a stunt completely, but a large part of the decision was to either boost United's standing, or to garner more interest in United being a leader. Um, Although I will say that, with all the things that United's doing, it's I don't know. I definitely shared in the sort of doubt of United itself, but I'm also kind of confused as to like what United wants to be, right? Um, cause like they,
Yeah, and it's really hard to tell.
uh huh,
Because they've done a lot of brand changes and a bunch of other changes recently. I think, notably changing their livery, and also taking out IFE from nearly all of their planes. And also they restored service to JFK, which is interesting because they were out of JFK for I think 6 years. So I guess for me at least, it seems like they're really aiming towards business travelers because they've also invested heavily in their Polaris cabin. And I guess, like you mentioned earlier, you would have to do something really big, or like start a huge business to even afford these boom supersonic planes in the first place. So I wonder, are they going almost too much towards the business traveler?
well, I mean, see, that's where I think that's where, I mean, I had definitely this confusion, because United, they take pride in being the airline that serves, the most destinations in the world, effectively, right? Um, is that actually, hold on, is that still true? Uh, is United still the airline that serves the most destinations? Let's see.
Yeah, so it appears United is the most
Yeah.
with 369, and then American second with 350.
Yeah, so I mean, they are definitely, pushing. They definitely have and are proud of an identity of being, a major connector of places, right? Of not just, focusing on New York to London or whatever. Um, but you know, but and I'm also, for example, I just opened, some aviation news, and just today, United Airlines announced that it was starting flights from Lewiston, Idaho, to Denver, Colorado. So you know, they're definitely not only focusing on the business travelers. They're definitely, still expanding out and adding more destinations to a network, being, you know, pushing a message of, yeah, we're not for only the elite and whatnot, but we are coming to, small cities like Lewiston, Idaho. But then again, they did, again, looking at the news of the purchase of these Boom Supersonic Jets, um, I it feels like they're trying to do everything, you know?
Yeah, and it's interesting because they just expanded their B concourse at Denver with I believe like 10ish or something around that more gates. So they're expanding where like obviously at Denver they serve a lot of the smaller airports in the Rocky Mountains, and then like you said they've also gone with a lot of business focused ideas and projects like this supersonic. So I agree it's really confusing what they're trying to do, and honestly I really don't necessarily see how Boom Supersonic fits into the larger strategy. I think they're gonna have to convince people. Presumably they're gonna use these planes out of Newark, which uh, I think has less of a prestige factor associated with it than say JFK. So I think on the level of serving like big city to big city, it's gonna be confusing and hard for me to see how they fit the boom into the larger network.
Yeah, I mean, didn't United like release the routes? They stated explicitly the routes that they wanted. What was it? Newark to London and Tokyo to San Francisco. Um, which are definitely, they're definitely elite routes. We shall say, right? There's definitely a high end, a very very sizable high end demand on both those routes. So I don't know. I mean, do you think that, for example, it's because right now United is not as competitive with them in terms of like the business traveler market? Because if
I think yeah, there's certainly a case for that because I think American obviously has a very premium focused. They're very focused on like satisfying business travelers, with like their lie flat business class seats and lie flat first class seats on their transcontinental routes. Of course, they also have a really good frequent flyer program that can allow you to accrue a high one world status pretty quickly and use it on a lot of high quality partners like Emirates. I think at one point, and Cathay Pacific or Qatar Airways. So I think American's in a good position, and then Delta, of course, also has IFE on all of their flights, and also they have the A220, which I know is a fan favorite among a lot of passengers. So, and I think that does leave United kind of in the middle, and I really don't know what exactly they're trying to appease to, and maybe this is it. Maybe Boom is what they're trying to break out towards,
mhm.
but like we've said, it's hard to tell.
It is, yeah, definitely hard to tell, especially, since they are, as I said, still, you know, expanding their network, right? Not just quality, but also quantity. Um, so that's also another interesting question of, if this is what their message is, right? Like if they are trying to increase their standing with the business travelers, do you think this will work? Because I mean, it's the plane is certainly eye catching, right? But is do you think this is what United needs?
To be honest with you, I think it's probably going to be a complete failure. Because of course, if their main routes are London to New York, presumably Newark, and then San Francisco to Tokyo, that really, I believe these planes are only going to have like 40 or something seats on it. So in terms of attracting new customers, you're definitely not going to be seeing many new customers coming to United. I think maybe they'll have some prestige associated with them. But I mean, in terms of their actual bottom line and making more profit, I really don't know what that could do for them. I guess they could get some additional marketing, but in terms of 40 passengers per flight is not going to bring any new connections. Like you're not going to be able to really connect as much in San Francisco or in Newark. So I don't really, unless they expand the network, I don't see how it's going to really work out for them. And
Right.
I'm curious what you think.
I mean, it's also, like it's they also say it's important to keep in mind, right? United has said that like these sorts of the tickets for these planes, they're not going to be, they're not going to be they're going to be, high because intrinsically, but they're not going to be, out of this world high, right? Um but, if you just look at the numbers, right? There are only 40 seats, right? So they're splitting the cost of only 40 passengers. But Boom has announced that the tickets, they will only cost $5,000 per seat. So effectively, you only have like what? You're only making a revenue of like 20,000 maximum per one flight, right? And $20,000 is not enough to operate. It's not enough to operate like anything, Not much less a freaking supersonic like plane. If they want to like keep the prices, if they want to have these planes be in operation, the prices are probably going to be up, much like many tens of thousands of dollars. Because that's what Concorde cost back in the day, and they had much more than 40. They had like, what was it, like 110, 120 seats? Um,
Yeah, a lot larger.
so this is another bold statement that I said, right? That I mentioned. They're bold not only on the idea of supersonic itself, but they're claiming only, well, Boom has claimed $5,000 only per seat, which I mean it's absolutely
Which is
ridiculous.
ridiculous because that's more than nearly any business class product already. That I think many people would say is like a great way to fly. And do you really need to spend more money for a shorter flight? And I know a lot of people would appreciate a longer flight in comfort like business class. So to the point where you can get a nice seat, and honestly, the time trade off really only favors those business travelers who need to be at like time sensitive meetings. So I think that's just another indication that like why is United announcing this to the mass public when it's really only going to serve a select few group of people?
Right, exactly. Um, and not it's all not only that, but also the PR, the demand, right? It's gonna make it much higher. If you remember again comparing to Concorde, right? Um, a low price for a round trip flight on Concorde cost $8,000. That was the low. A high was like 13,000. So, I mean, I guess maybe United's trying to push up their. I don't know. They're trying to become more Emirates esque, in pushing out a very luxury, top high end product. But I mean, I don't know. I certainly agree with your assessment that it's going to be a failure, at least on that front.
Yeah, and there's some images on Boom's website of what the product's going to look like, and I have to say it looks pretty stunning to me. Although I would say it's far below what Emirates currently offers, especially with their new 777 first class suites, because the seats, from what they're showing, aren't enclosed. Presumably they're lie flat. They look really nice, but are they worth 5,000? The seats certainly aren't. Maybe the time is to some people.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, a lot of people who make. There's tons of people out there, who make what is it over what $2,000 an hour that you need to generate to be able to pay for the time on spent on the ticket.
Yeah, I certainly have a hard time imagining that many people at all could even afford this. And like I said earlier, I think the time trade off is is it really going to be that worth it, especially on these shorter flights where it only cuts off 3 hours, and especially even on the red eye flights where I think a lot of people are fine just going to bed and then waking up refreshed in the morning because you really don't lose any daytime over that. So is it really worth $5,000?
I guess it's for like the top executives who like again the top executives who have a meeting at like 4 p.m. and it's already noon. But otherwise, I don't know. I mean, I guess in terms of like the actual, again, in terms of the actual routes itself, there certainly is, I think, potential for much more routes. Um, but I don't know. I guess this is one of those things that it really depends on how United puts it to work.
Yeah, and I like like we said, I think it's going to be difficult to trust United and actually in putting it together based on their past record. And I guess that begs the question: like, do you think there's any other potential scenarios where supersonic jets could work out? Like, of course, Concorde was with had some good moments with British Airways and French and Air France.
Well, I think another interesting thing to consider is we've talked about how United, right, and this might be United is probably doing this for like the PR purposes, but another thing an interesting aspect is what other airlines do you think might be on board, or can you imagine the supersonic jet as a part of? Because that also greatly affects whether or not this is a success or not.
Yeah, so of course I think we have to just primarily consider Air France and British Airways because they use the Concorde, and I think they have the right demand pairs because they're shorter flights or short-ish flights. They're only 6 or 7 hours, where they can have some significant cuts in time, and they can also gain prestige from it. And also, of course, having a big demand, especially business demand, is key. But of course, I think now in the modern day, we've had an obviously changing world, and a lot of cities have became, I guess, popular to an extent that they weren't previously. Notably, in the Middle East, we have Dubai or Abu Dhabi or even Doha, are are a lot larger now, and I think could potentially attract. And of course, their countries are really rich. Could attract people who want to spend that kind of money to go to cities like London and Dubai, which or to London or and Paris, which are only 6 or 7 hours away. And I think, of course, if we can do it between North America and Europe, we can also expand between Europe and the Middle East, or maybe even to East Asia.
Yeah, I mean, for you did mention like for example the Middle Eastern airlines and they how they are quite rich to put it. For example, let's take Emirates or Qatar, right? I mean, do you think that for example they might be other airlines which could be considered, to take hold of Boom Supersonic? Because I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, I think we can get to U.S. airlines later, but I think especially from an international standpoint, the Middle Eastern airlines I would expect would have an interest at least because they've always been interested in pushing like the top of the line products, with Etihad and the Residence, or Emirates with their onboard showers, or with the Q Suite from Qatar Airways that revolutionized business class. I think they've all had tendencies to want to innovate and to create top of the line products, and I guess it's going to be hard with innovation with regard to the supersonic jets because there can't really be a super luxury product on that plane given its small size. So I think it'll be difficult for those airlines to create something that can make their brand image unique again and to maintain its each of their like unique aspects. But of course, I believe the supersonic jet would be a really easy way to make a lot of money on those routes from like Dubai or Doha to London or to Paris.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely Boom is definitely the supersonic jet is definitely a luxury. It's definitely attention grabbing, right? It's all about having the top end, the high end, which is also what Emirates and as you said, Emirates, Qatar, Etihad are all about. I don't think I think I agree that they would definitely be in contention to acquire the plane. I don't think they would be. I don't know. I guess Emirates or Etihad would probably like make it gold inside and all that, but it's definitely not gonna be the same experience, right? Like there physically is not the space to put
Yeah,
rooms
yeah.
on there. If you if you want to still maintain at least some sort of cost, right? Some sort of realistic cost. But I mean, you did also mention, for example, we'll get to, for example, American, other American airlines later. But I mean, do you think that, for example, do you think that in the United States, American or Delta would potentially take hold of the plane as well?
I think there's strong possibilities in either case. I think Delta has not really a need to do it, and I don't expect them to do it, especially because they've historically shown to Maverick themselves. Of course, they're the only U.S. carrier besides JetBlue now to operate the A220, and they were the only legacy carrier not to buy the 737 Max, and both have worked out really well for them. So I trust that they're going to make the smart decision, and I think announcing a plane 9 years in advance or 8 years in advance from United isn't necessarily a smart decision because it could very easily backfire. But American, on the other hand, has really struggled with their direction, I would say, and has really catered to business travelers, but also is trying to maintain their leisure base, of course, with the 350 destinations. And obviously that hasn't really worked out because they've been known to treat their customers pretty poorly. But from a business standpoint, they've shown that they've wanted to copy United and Delta in the past, and I would expect that they would feel pretty envious of United's new brand image that they're creating. And I think American also is a prime candidate because they have hubs in New York JFK and in LAX, so they could be used. On routes that United wouldn't serve because United is only flying out of Newark or San Francisco.
Yeah, I mean, definitely what you said. American definitely, is in competition primarily with United. As we did talk about before, on the list of the airlines with the most destinations served, United leads, but American follows, pretty close behind. So I mean, I definitely agree that if this does go through, or maybe even before any tangible results take place, I think American definitely will want to acquire these planes, to also make itself stand out, whereas Delta is perhaps more cautious, shall we say, and not
Yeah.
so heavy handed with its decisions like United.
And do you think any other non-U.S. airlines would be interested? Maybe like Air Canada or Lufthansa or KLM. Do you think there's any demand there?
I think, well, again, there definitely is demand, but I think like, for example, I don't know. It again really depends on the type of airline the type of airline each airline wants to be. How we mentioned, United is sort of caught in a crisis of whether or not it wants to further, of how it has conflicting messages on being simultaneously expanding more towards increasing connectivity while also catering to the business class. I think as we mentioned, the Middle Eastern airlines, they are prime candidates for this luxury new plane. Um, I think that for other airlines, for example, you know, I would say they're again, because it's hard to make any firm assessments. I think that, for example, airlines like Lufthansa or KLM, or even BA and Air France, there is probably a market for them because the major cities in France or Germany, they are very business centric and certainly have a lot of business travel from across the world. But in terms of other airlines, for example, Turkish Airlines or for example, other airlines like that who maybe aren't so concentrated in business in world class business centers. I think they would probably pass up on the plane. Because again, it really depends on what kind of model they're striving for, right? If there isn't a demand, if they're if the prime market is for tourism, or even for business travelers that are not of the world top tier caliber, then it just financially doesn't make sense. I don't know. Do you think can you envision this new supersonic jet with other airlines names on it?
I think it's really hard for me to, and I think like we've discussed, it's not really a very profitable aircraft. And I think the Concorde was, and I think kind of exemplified that. And I don't really see how this is going to be different, especially considering there's far less seats available. And I guess really the only avenue I see is if it can bring prestige to a country. You know, like Qatar Airways, even if some of their routes have been unprofitable, they've managed to essentially shape the entirety of the country around the airline, which has brought a lot of tourism in, and I think that's been good. And I wonder if the prestige factor can carry some airlines that otherwise wouldn't be able to make routes profitable either through marketing, because now United can say they're the only airline that's supersonic, and I wonder if that gives them benefits. I really don't know, and I wonder. I think honestly the prestige factor is really the only thing that can carry an airline. Otherwise, if they can't get the demand, of course. So I think it's hard for any airline that doesn't have major demand to actually make it work.
Yeah, for sure. It's especially the more touristy oriented ones, like Turkish, as I mentioned, maybe Thai Airways. Um, I don't know, Qantas to an extent as well. They're probably not going to take hold. Just like how a lot of airlines didn't sign up for the A380, even though it certainly is a beast airplane to have. Just because, first of all, it doesn't make financial sense, but second of all, um, you know, the type of airline they are is just not suited towards having the type of plane. Um, but then again, so maybe there will be some more announcements as we go, as we shall see, of more airlines trying to expand their image, much like how United is doing with the plane. So maybe more schools will follow United's. I'm sorry. Maybe more airlines will follow United's lead in maybe diversifying their standard model.
Yeah, and the other thing that United is seemingly very focused on with Boom is to make these planes net carbon zero, which presumably if every airline buys from Boom, they're going to continue to focus on net carbon zero. But I wonder, I think a lot of airlines would be concerned about that because it seems very difficult to implement that in the status quo, and I wonder that could be an avenue where other airlines. Try to differentiate themselves and just get the plane quicker than United. Like, do you actually think it's actually feasible for United to get a net carbon zero plane in 8 years?
Uh, I think it's ridiculous. Because I think as we pointed out before, the technology doesn't exist. Like we don't have a 100% you know f- alt, you know sustainable aviation fuel yet. Because if we did, it would be utilized everywhere, right? And not to
Yeah,
mention, not only do you have to consider the sustainability factor, you also have to consider how to make such a fuel or how to get such technology to allow a sustainable supersonic fuel. Because the airplanes, they have limitations on range and they have limitations on speed as well. So I think I don't know if United wants to keep its other claims of, for example, being not as expensive as we would think, and also being, for example, more accessible, as well as maintain the time factor. I think it is impossible to really have a to attain carbon neutral status by 2020, what is it, 2029.
yeah, and I guess it's important that 2029 would be when United is starting service, but 2025 is when they believe this plane can be rolled out, and I have a hard time imagining that we'll have a sustainable carbon carbon free source by 2025. Certainly.
It's 24 years, huh? How long did Concorde take to be developed? Let's see. Concorde was developed. The origins date to the early 1950s, but it only came into service in 1969. That was its first flight. So nearly 20 years of development. Um, but I mean, even if you 20 years to go from nothing to supersonic, um, I don't know. I mean, the development for this new technology will certainly take less than 20 years because it's not from nothing from zero to something, from nothing to something. But I mean, 4 years is just like come on, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I have a hard time imagining how Boom is going to gain credibility if they can't achieve that by then. And of course, they're also going to have to find other customers by 2025 as well. And we haven't seen anything in that regard at all since United made this announcement. So that's certainly worrisome to some degree. Like I would expect other airlines to be hopping onto this train.
hmm hmm I mean, I guess you do have to allow for some time because normally what happens is once you have one have one order, right, there will be more and more people who follow along. But I think another question which is interesting to consider is, what do you think would be the long term implications for you know the result of United? So, for example, if it works out, do you think that this plane will be spread far and wide across the globe? Will it become the new norm? And if it fails, do you think we'll give up on supersonic again and maybe just not try again for another few decades?
Well, I think just as any aircraft has really developed over time. It's not. It's going to take a while for it to be the standard around the norm, and of course, it took forever to get fully long haul flights that didn't have to make a stop in other cities. And I think that will probably be the same here because as the maps have shown, this plane really can't fly that far. I believe it can't even fly to Sydney from San Francisco nonstop. So I think in order for it to be more of a worldwide standard, it's going to need to at least make some improvements to its range and in other regards. I think in some ways it would help if it didn't actually have to rely on fuel and it could just have either an extraordinarily large battery or somehow run on solar panels, and those technologies may actually enable longer flights. But of course, those technologies are far, far away. So I I anticipate there'll be some success with United in at least attracting people. I think it'll be difficult to know how profitable it is to begin with because I don't think United's going to be super transparent with that information. But I think there'll be some success, and I hope that translates into more people getting excited about it. And I guess besides the A350 and the A220, there hasn't been an incredible amount of innovation within any aircraft, and I think this could be that new innovation that was like the 747 or the Concorde of past eras.
I mean, I mean, it's technically not an innovation since it already exists, right? It had existed before, but
Albeit
yeah,
unsuccessfully.
well, it was successful, just not profitable, right? So it's definitely a challenge. Like again, the main reason that was uh, Concorde was you know was shut done away with. It was just because of the financial issues, right? For example, when fuel costs skyrocketed in the financial crises or in 9/11, Concorde was there was heavy pressure for Concorde to be discontinued, and it took even a fatal accident for them to really seal the deal, right? Like the Air France and British Airways, they wanted to keep Concorde in service because again for its prestige and its status, but the costs forced it down. However, now you see United and Boom, um, they have developed this plane which has less than less than a half. Well, I'm sorry. It has a half of, or even at sometimes a third of um, the capacity that Concorde had, and they're also claiming to be able to develop, a carbon neutral fuel, aviation fuel, within the span of just a few years. So, that is going to force costs up even higher per one passenger, per one ticket. You know, if you're spreading the cost of operating the flight amongst like 120 people, and that was already sky high, imagine what we'll do if you're spreading the cost with 40 people, right? So, again, it's if we thought like Concorde was expensive, or that for example financial issues plagued Concorde, I think this is going to be that, amplified, which may, you know, reveal the project to be just completely unfeasible. But I don't know. I guess what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it depends on the kind of fuel they use. If they somehow manage to use electric batteries or solar panels, which I think is not going to happen, but if that could somehow be put in place, then they have at least less to worry about with at least fluctuating fuel prices. Uh, but also, there has been some success recently with airlines operating generally premium heavy aircraft with less seats. You know, like the La Compagnie type that operate all business class flights with like almost like less than 100 seats, but manage to turn profits. If Boom could be like that for United, then maybe but I would see it working because if they can fill people, and 40 seats on a plane on a relatively small plane could work out because I don't imagine the plane's going to be that expensive for United because it's not that big. Uh, the only issue is that it's really just gonna skew uh, those who can't afford it out of the market, which will be really sad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, financial issues. They it's really it, the success of United and Boom Super, the Boom plane. It will really depend on just how well they're able to manage the financial issues. And I guess we shall see how that turns out, eh? Um, Although, do you think, like, for example, if all of this turns out to be a failure, do you think we will try again with Supersonic, or do you think it'll be put down for good for a second time at that?
I think it will be really hard to tell because, of course, we're gonna have to figure out what the failure is. Because if it's just a mismanagement by United or maybe picking the wrong routes, then I don't think it's really a problem with the aircraft. If it's a fuel problem, then I don't think that's an issue either. Because, of course, we're gonna see more renewable and less fuel, like actual like liquid based fuels in the future, and that could probably make the plane immune to some of its initial faults. So I don't think we're gonna see it go away altogether because I imagine that the bulk of its failures will be things that will be mitigated over time. Uh, I mean, I'm surprised that United has stayed afloat despite all of their issues. Um, so it's gonna be hard to tell, but my guess is that we're not gonna see it disappear because I, the trend has been that we've had faster and faster planes over time. And at a certain point, we're going to be able to reach a supersonic speed successfully that can benefit consumers, but also benefit the airlines.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and also, when we imagine the future, right? We imagine, being able to zoom off to the other side of the world in like what, a few moments, right? And in all the pictures and all the depictions of the future, um, the planes themselves too. They're not your standard 737s, right? They're always like effectively in the archetype um, of the Boom Supersonic plane. So it really, it really works towards, it really suits, shall we say, many people's images of idealized images of the future. So I definitely think that, I think that, like you said, if the issues of the failure of the Spoon plane, if they aren't about something intrinsically wrong with supersonic travel itself, then I don't think, even if this fails, we will definitely try again, right? Um, I think supersonic is this will definitely, if this fails, it will definitely not be the last time that um, you know a supersonic a supersonic plane will be developed and put into at least um, experimental phase, which is what Boom is trying to do now, and are being pressured to to stay on schedule in a super tight 4 years.
Yeah, and just like any uh, prototype, I think it would be good to, or any engineering project, having the Concorde and potentially a boom failure would just be stepping stones for a more successful aircraft in the future that can work for everyone.
Hmm. I mean, I guess it really depends on how United puts this into into effect. Um, I mean, just by the way, how when's the last time you flew United? Because
Um,
hmm
yeah, it's been almost 2 years. At the last, I flew it from San Francisco to Portland for with my cross country team. So I didn't actually pick the airline, but they were convenient.
oh, so you didn't choose Boom. I'm sorry, you didn't choose United Airlines like explicitly.
I did not.
Mm. I mean, I guess that's something like United really wants to change. That's what they're doing with this plane. They want people to, get more excited about flying, United itself, eh?
Yeah, and how about you? Did you pick United the last time you flew them?
Well, I flew. The last time I flew United was last September. It was just a normal domestic flight, Chicago to Boston, and I mean, I only chose them because they were the cheapest. So, there was certainly not an abundance for United at all. Um,
And yeah, and I have a hard time imagining that they're going to be the cheapest with these new boom planes.
oh, for sure. It's but hey, since this is technically something that is new, right? Um, I guess it's best to keep optimistic. Because I mean I definitely want to have the experience of riding a supersonic jet sometime in my life. Eh?
Yeah, and I guess that brings up an interesting question. Like, can the prestige factor make a plane successful? And I know we talked about that briefly, but like you know about the Concorde, and did it really have a tangible impact and make people change their perceptions about British Airways or Air France? And can people do that about United?
Well, I mean, I think the easiest way to answer that question is to just look at the airlines now, right? What do you think about British Airways and Air France?
Well, they're pretty bad to most people.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I think that's pretty representative of the amount of you know I think that's pretty representative of the long term effect that Concorde had on those airlines, which is to say, like none at all. Um, so I think it's if United gets this, it gets the supersonic jets. If they overcome all the numerous obstacles, right? I think they definitely will have an easier time in terms of the PR and in terms of painting themselves as one that's focused on the experiences. But I think also if it fails, right? If this whole project fails, it will be, I don't know, because also remember that Concorde was inherently not profitable, right? So not only did it not really improve the long term image of British Airways or Air France, but it also cost them money. So there is a chance that that might happen again with United, where it not only costs United billions, but also doesn't help anything at all, which could probably like worst case scenario, since United is not receiving you know United is not nationalized or receiving subsidies to the extent that Concorde did. Um, if all goes wrong, United could potentially see irrecoverable losses from this. But I am optimistic. So
Yeah, and I think there's room to be because I mean it's rather strange the timing on this that they've announced this boom, but also in February their purchase of electric air taxis. These significant developments have all been announced during a pandemic where these airlines have already seen what like record losses look like. So presumably they think that maybe the COVID era announcements can either bring back optimism or somehow make the money out of these record losses they're facing. It's strange this timing, and I guess it does provide a sense of
yeah,
optimism.
but that's at the end of the day, that's really all we can do. Eh? Just remain optimistic and hope. We will be able to take supersonic flights.
And yeah, and hopefully they're affordable. And it's actually interesting because I believe Boom did say at one point they were intending to make their flights $100 per person, but now that United is going to operate them, they're of course not going to be $100. So I'm curious where Boom got that number and whether we'll see $100 flights elsewhere. Maybe Boom will operate as our own airline sometime.
Yeah. Although speaking of $100 tickets, you're actually flying tomorrow, aren't you?
Yeah, that is correct.
Where you're not
And
only
I'm
actually you're not only flying, you're flying a new airline, aren't you?
Yeah, indeed, I'm flying Velo Airlines, whose trademark is that they offer $19 flights one way from Santa Rosa in the Sonoma County area to Burbank. Unfortunately, I did not get the $19 fare. I got the $29
Oh
fare, which
no.
is still pretty
Oh no,
impressive.
the $29
Um,
fare.
and I'm expecting there to be pretty bare bones. I know that it's 29 inches of legroom, which I believe is equatable to Ryanair. And then I believe they will have free drinks and snacks,
Oh
which is
wow.
surprising to me because I did hear that they intended to charge for them in the future, but they're still free at the moment. So I'm going to enjoy that while I can. But yeah, I've actually never flown out of Santa Rosa Airport before. And it's the only airport in the Bay Area that you can board from a jet bridge, or not from a jet bridge, from a remote stand. So that should be pretty exciting.
Oh wow. And so you are flying to Burbank, right? On the
Yeah, I'm flying to Burbank tomorrow, and then I'm coming home on Wednesday back from Burbank, and that flight will actually be in an extra legroom seat. It's interesting. Avelo, they change their each seat as you get higher up is towards the front is more expensive. So I'm curious to try out the different products and let you know what they're like.
Yeah, definitely. Send me all the pictures because not everybody gets to ride, a new airline, quite, you know, relatively soon from when they launched. So yeah, definitely tell me and send pictures of what it's like, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a bit disappointed because I've missed some of the key flights in the Bay Area. We had the last U.S. Airways flight ever in 2015, and I missed that. So I'm glad I can take advantage of one for once.
Yeah, man. I mean, we'll definitely talk more about it too next time. Of not only your experiences with the Velo, but also the other new airline. What is it? Breeze Airways, I believe.
Yeah,
But yeah, man. Honestly, just have fun out there tomorrow.
certainly will.
Yeah, and yeah, look forward to seeing your pictures, seeing what a Velo is like, and we will definitely be talking more about those airlines on the next episode. So stay tuned.